So here we go. We're going to start off with the Critical Review or Annals of Literature, volumes 57 to 58, published in 1783. We're going to be on page 141. Let me zoom in. We'll get straight to the point. It's talking about the Portuguese and the expulsion of the Jews. Prince Henry's colonies were enlarged by his successors. It's talking about in Africa. King John II in 1492 expelled all the Jews to the island of St. Thomas, that's off the coast of Africa, which had been discovered in 1471, and to other Portuguese settlements on the continent of Africa. And from these banished Jews, the Black Portuguese, as they are called, and the Jews in Loango, who are despised even by the very Negroes, are descended. So, if you look up St. Thomas on a map, there's another St. Thomas in the Caribbean, I think. That's not the one that's being spoken about here. If you look at St. Thomas on a map, it's right off the coast of Africa. So this document is saying that in 1492, King John II expelled Jews to the island of St. Thomas and to other Portuguese settlements on the continent of Africa. And from these banished Jews, the Black Portuguese, as they are called, and the Jews in Loangos, who are despised even by the very Negroes, are descended. So the thing with this document, people read it different ways. Some people say, and from these banished Jews, the Black Portuguese. Some say that the banished Jews are called the Black Portuguese, and others say that it's saying, from these banished Jews, the Black Portuguese, as they are called, are descended. Some people say that this document is saying these banished Jews were called the Black Portuguese, and some people say that this document is saying that the Black Portuguese descend from these banished Jews. So if the document is saying that these banished Jews were called the Black Portuguese, that proves that, we can just leave that at that. They were black. They were called Black Portuguese Jews. But let's entertain the other interpretation, which is usually used by people who want to suggest that these black people descend from white Jews. So let's go with that interpretation. And from these banished Jews, the Black Portuguese, as they are called, and the Jews in Loango, who were despised even by the very Negroes, are descended. So notice it says the Jews in Loango are also descended from these Jews, from the banished Jews. I'll read it one more time, because sometimes with documents you got to break them down and examine them in order to really get the truth. And from these banished Jews, the Black Portuguese, as they are called, and the Jews in Loango, who are despised even by the very Negroes, are descended. So it's clearly saying, undeniably, that the Jews in Loango descend from these banished Jews. So that brings us to the next document, or the next book. It's called A Tribute for the Negro, being a vindication of the moral, intellectual, and, blah, 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 by Wilson Armistead. It has a black man on the cover, but Wilson Armistead was not a black man when you look him up. I don't know why this, I don't know if the original book has this photo on the cover, but anyways, let's get into it. We're on page 65. We can start. Where are we going to start at? Right here. I'll zoom in a little. A remarkable fact in the history of Loango and the Empire of Congo, he's talking about West Africa, is that the country, according to a statement which was fully credited by Ollendorp, himself a writer of most correct judgment and of unimpeachable veracity, contains many Jews settled in it. We're on 66 now. Many Jews settled in it, Loango, who retain their religious rights and the distinct habits which keep them isolated from other nations. Though thus separate from the African population, they are black. The Jews are black here in Loango, and resemble the other Negroes in every respect as to physical character. It is probably an allusion to this case that Pennington in his textbook says the descendants of a colony of Jews originally from Judea, settled on the coast of Africa, are black. So, it says that these Jews in Loango are black. They're separate from the African population. They are black and resemble the other Negroes in every respect as to physical character. So in part two, at the end of part two, I was showing how people trying to box us in and say the Jews weren't Negroes. They weren't Negroes. I was showing how that's like it's a pretty dishonest way to approach this topic and this issue. Because right here it's saying that these Jews who are in Luongo, they are black and resemble the Negroes in every respect as the physical character. So basically what I'm getting at is if somebody were to look at these Jews and not know that they were Jews, they would call them Negroes. They would assume that they were Negroes. But you can see clearly here that this source is differentiating them from the Negroes, although it says they looked exactly like them. So this is just another example of how we can't let people box us in with the term Negro and limit us to being called Negroes. Because these Jews were black and looked exactly like Negroes, but they weren't called Negroes. They were called Jews because they were Jews. Now in the previous book, let me go back for a second. It said that the banished Jews from Portugal, it said that the Jews in Luongo descended from them. It says, and from these banished Jews, the black Portuguese as they are called, and the Jews in Luongo, who were despised even by the very Negroes, are descended. So what people will do who don't, want the Portuguese Jews to have been black, they'll say that no, the Portuguese Jews were white, and they went to West Africa, and they married black women, and their descendants are black. And they'll do this by using documents that talk about white Jewish Portuguese men going into Africa and marrying black women. And they'll use the fact that those documents talk about the mulatto children from those unions, and they'll try to make it seem like, look, all or any black Jews that have ties to Portugal descend from white Jewish men and black women. But I'll show you how that is not the case at all. I'm not saying there weren't mulattoes that descended from white Jewish men and black women in Africa, native black women. But to say that that's the only way that black Jews from Portugal existed is dishonest. And let me show exactly what I mean by that. This next book is called The Princeton Review, Volume 27, published in 1855. We're going to be on page 212. We'll start right here. It says Luongo family. The inhabitants of Luongo do not differ materially from those of Gabon and Cape Lopez. It is probable that the Jewish type of character mentioned above forms a larger element of population here than it does on the Pongo coast. And this doubtless was what led to the Roman Catholic missionaries who labored here during the 16th and 17th centuries to the conclusion that they had found black Jews in Luongo. So let's scroll down a little bit. We just read how it's talking about the same black Jews in Luongo that we just read in the previous source. But pay attention to how it says that the black Jews were found in the 16th and 17th centuries. Remember, the Inquisition happened in the late 1400s, at the end of the 15th century. So if they found black Jews in Luongo in the 16th century, that's not enough time for white men to go into Africa and create an entire race of black Jews. Okay? It would take at the very least over 100 years for a white population of Jewish men to turn entirely black to the point that they resemble Negroes in every respect of physical character, as we read. Okay? That's just one way to disprove that idea. But let's read on. Actually, it would probably take longer than that. If they found these black Jews in the 16th century, which is the very next century, because the Inquisition and the banishment happened at the end of the 15th century, in the late 1400s, some of these black Jews probably had grandparents who were banished from there. So to say that they all turned black and they were originally white, no. But let's keep reading. Barbeau states that in the reign of Don John II and about the close of the 15th century, like I was just saying, large numbers of Jews were expelled from Portugal and taken to the coast of southern Guinea, that the island of St. Thomas, which we were just talking about, which is not more than 150 miles from the mainland, was populated by mulattoes descended from these Jewish exiles and Angola women. So now it's talking about white Jewish men who went and married black women, native black women in Africa, like how I was saying. Let's see what it says. It is possible that the Jewish type of character noticed at the Gaboon and Lawango may have originated from this source. But if so, it is unknown to the present inhabitants of the country, and it would have been somewhat singular if the Roman Catholic missionaries at Lawango had not detected this circumstance instead of regarding them as a pure African family of Jews. So one, I just pointed out how from the end of the 15th century into the 16th century, that's not enough time for white Jewish men to marry native black women and produce and create an entirely new black population. That just can't happen in that short of a time period. Number two, it says that when they pretty much asked these Jewish people and the people in that area, the black Jews, if they descended from that mixed population, and it said they didn't know what they were talking about. It says it is possible that the Jewish type of character noticed at the Gaboon and Lawango may have originated from this source, talking about the mulatto population. But if so, it is unknown to the present inhabitants of the country. It is unknown to them if that was where they came from, that mulatto population. They said, we don't know what you're talking about. But three, it says, and it would have been somewhat singular if the Roman Catholic missionaries at Lawango had not detected this circumstance instead of regarding them as a pure African family of Jews. So three, it says that the Roman Catholic missionaries who found them in the 16th and 17th centuries, they didn't detect any, clues or anything that would lead them to believe that these black Jews in Lawango descended from a mixed population that was created by white Jewish men and black native African women. Okay, so that's how you deal with that when people try to not get you to talk about these sources. This just proves that these black Jews in Lawango, they'd always been black, and their ancestors that were banished from Portugal were black. Also, when you get into the history of West Africa and the white Jewish men from Portugal who settled there and took black African wives, their mixed descendants knew that they were the descendants of white men, and they thought they were better than the unmixed black people, and they took pride in being the descendants of white men. They also took other black people as slaves. That isn't the case here, as we can clearly see. If these black Jews were the descendants of white men, they would have known so, and they would have said so. But regardless, in part 2, we went over plenty of evidence showing that Jews in Portugal and Spain were black already, to begin with.